Welcome to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. I'm Mercedes Schlapp, and I am so thrilled to have with me the author of a fabulous book, Amateur Hour, Kamala Harris in the White House, Charlie Spearing, who's also senior political reporter at Daily Mail. Charlie, welcome to CPAC Now.
Thanks for having me, Mercedes. It's good to see you again.
Okay, so this is like a must-read book. I think people need to understand that the reality is, as you've explained, that pretty much we're a brain stroke away from Kamala Harris becoming president. So what made you think, okay, we got to focus on the vice president when you were writing this book?
Yeah, Mercedes, I wrote the book for two reasons. One, it's a deeply hilarious story. Kamala Harris's first few years in the White House was quite comical for this, especially in this town. Now, a lot of people behind the scenes are snickering, but especially the Democrats, don't want to speak publicly because they don't want to be branded as a racist or a sexist. So I kind of wanted to sort of pull the veil off of that and say, look, it's okay to criticize the vice president. There are reasons why she's bad at her job, and we can actually have a conversation about it, especially before the election. And that was sort of the other reason I wrote it, is for the first time in modern history, we have a chance where the vice president could take over for the president. If Biden runs and wins in 2024, there's a very good chance she could become the 47th president of the United States and never running a successful campaign by herself.
Right. Well, let's break this down a little further. We know, President Biden, obviously it's one gaffe after the other. Apparently, he just told Iran, quote unquote, don't, meaning, don't attack Israel. Obviously, no one's really listening to Joe Biden. On top of that, then you have Kamala Harris, which it almost feels like the White House and the campaign, they don't really know what to do with her. So they're always trying to do push a reset button to say, well, maybe if we throw Kamala Harris with the abortion activists and send her, I don't know, to an abortion clinic, because that's really, a really positive place to be, that'll actually help her from even from an image perspective. Is anything working to help Kamala Harris?
Yeah, it was interesting because right during the first couple of years of their presidency, they sent Kamala out on some of the big issues to sort of help take them off of Biden's plate, immigration being the number one. Even on foreign policy, they sent her to some pretty significant conferences to try to get her some experience on those issues. But each time she came away sort of embarrassing herself, embarrassing the president. And that's why they've sort of put her in her safe lane for the duration of the campaign. Now, luckily for Kamala, abortion is sort of the front and center issue. And Kamala, as I detail in the book, Kamala has been campaigning hard left on abortion since the day she ran for office as California Attorney General, as Senator of California, and even as a candidate for president in 2020 during the primary. She was the most radically left on abortion among all the Democrats on the stage, and really worked hard to be sort of the number one candidate on that issue. So it's understandable why the Biden campaign would sort of say, okay, you're clearly experienced at talking about this issue and not making any key mistakes. We know Joe Biden doesn't like talking about abortion, and so Kamala is really stepping up on that aspect.
So in your book, you mention that President Biden knew that Vice President Kamala Harris was not up to the job. In fact, he was looking at Gretchen Whitmer as his potential pick in the book, but President Obama had some influence in President Biden's decision. Do you think Biden has buyer's remorse?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think there was a big hope that Kamala could really step up and maybe even do such a good job that he didn't have to run again. Certainly the Biden family wasn't committed to running again for re-election. They only sort of sent the message out that they were only going to do one term, and then they would turn it over to the younger Democrats in the party. But, most Democrats will concede that because Kamala failed so miserably on the national stage, there was no question Biden had to run again. The only question is whether they can get him to Election Day.
So, look, Charlie, you were there when President Trump was in the White House. You were covering Trump's administration, Trump's White House. And I don't know, you know how the vice president's role is. It's pretty ceremonial. It's not that complicated. You pretty much read off of they brief you, You read the speech, not too hard, okay? It's not a hard job. Yet every time Kamala Harris goes out and speaks, whether it's on a domestic issue or on a foreign policy issue, it is truly a word salad. It is truly problematic. I mean, what's going through her brain?
Yeah, I think there's a little uncertainty, especially in those first couple of years, trying to be authentic, but also trying to stay on talking points. And she really found herself struggling, even when she was, I detail in the book some of the more difficult moments where she had to be on camera. The famous interview with Lester Holt, of course, when, he asked her why she hadn't been to the border. That was a question that her staff expected her to answer and even gave her a prepared answer. But instead, she just kind of stumbled and kind of flew off the handle, saying, I haven't been to Europe. That was not the answer that they had prepared for her. And so it was just another example of how, no matter how hard you try to coach Kamala Harris,
Yes,
she often sits back and relies on feelings and a whole lot of dependent clauses strung together, which is what now, as conservatives so lovingly portray them as word salads, and they just keep coming.
So, but going back to Kamala earlier in her career, it almost, and I hate to sound so, what's the word? I almost feel like I'm TMZ. Like, she pretty much slept her way to the top in a lot of ways. When you were looking back into her earlier years, was there anything notable that you remember that you say, wait a second, this is really concerning?
Yeah, it's not necessarily fair to say that she slept her way to the top, but she certainly got her start in politics because she dated Willie Brown when he was running for mayor. Willie Brown was 60 years old. Kamala was a relatively unknown prosecutor at age 29. And Willie Brown sort of opened doors and introduced her to sort of the high society of California, the wealthy donors, the people that you have to convince if you ever want to run for office. And they were enamored with her. And so she didn't necessarily have to prove herself to voters. She had to prove herself to that class of people. And she certainly spent a lot of time with them, getting to know them. And the other thing about Willie Brown, and Kamala's team does not like to talk about Willie Brown, but he also appointed her, when she was his girlfriend, he also appointed her to 2 different state positions in California. They paid her about $400,000 over just a couple of years. That's close to $1 million in today's money. So he even bought her a brand new BMW while she was his girlfriend. So it's unfair to suggest that Willie Brown has nothing to do with Kamala's political career. He had everything to do with that career, and she's been fighting to get out from that brand ever since.
So we know Kamala has experienced multiple issues, bullying from the White House staff, the refusal to be a team player. You've seen a lot of these resignations coming out of the VP's office. What are you hearing now? Like, has things gotten better? Is there a better relationship? There's always contention between the president and the vice president's office, that we know. But what is the relationship now? Is she more, making sure that she's in a better position? I mean, what do you see the dynamics are right now in the White House?
Well, right now, Kamala is still trying to press her brand, her own political brand. And at the same time, she's still sort of falling into campaign mode. And she's pretty good at doing that, at falling into campaign mode, following instructions, doing what she's told, and helping out the team that way. But she's also sort of working on other issues. We saw this with Gaza, how she's sort of working to push herself further to the left on issues of Gaza and the war and the Israeli war in Gaza. So you definitely see a little bit of that going on, but at the same time, she doesn't have the absolute blow up with her staff. Her staff have relatively settled. There definitely was a couple more that departed of significant staffers after I finished the book, but that is sort of dwindled down as the campaign gets into real serious mode. And so it'll be interesting to see if she runs and wins, will she sort of garner like this revival, or whether it'll be more of the same?
She remains one of the most unpopular vice presidential candidates, vice presidents actually, in the polls. What do you think contributes to that?
I think both the right and the left. The right has clearly understood who she is as somebody who obviously a media fueled candidate who was selected because of her identity, someone who's not a serious person and someone who struggles on the national stage. And on the left, I think you have a lot of disappointment. You know, Kamala ran as one of the most leftist candidates in 2020, really seizing on a lot of the issues important to the left. But now that she's vice president, she can't deliver on anything. So I think the left is also discouraged, and they don't see her as an inspirational figure. And a big part of that is how badly her campaign went in 2020. She had sort of the headwinds of all the best media people and the best donors and the best talking heads in the party. But wow, when she got on the ground and started talking to actual voters, that's when she kind of flopped. And I think I think once people see through that media aura that's built up around them, I think they realize authenticity is one of the most important things.
If there's one story in the book that really stuck out for you that you would say this is like one of the funny ones, which one would you point to?
Well, there was details of an event where First Lady Jill Biden was planning to go to Poland to sort of signal solidarity with Ukraine. This was back a couple of years ago when that first started. But then Kamala made it very clear that she was going to Ukraine. And so the First Lady's office kind of had to back down. And that relationship is very interesting because Jill Biden has learned to make peace with Kamala, but she's still not a huge fan. She famously favored Susan Rice during the sort of the decision process on who to pick as a running mate. And she remembered the attacks that Kamala made against Joe and the rest of the family. So the family wasn't necessarily convinced with that, but they've sort of going along with it right now. But there's still no real love there.
Do you think that the campaign will continue to try to control what media she does? They have put her out, I think, at least in the White House. She's done a lot of these international trips, but my goodness, talk about big word salad. She's constantly, I think, messing up foreign policy or trying to explain countries on a map. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Do you think they'll continue to push her out on that international stage as well?
Yeah, I don't think they'll be putting her in very many upcoming interviews. Famously, they were going to have her go on Jimmy Kimmel tonight, but for some reason, the vice president's office canceled that. I'm not sure why. Maybe there was going to be some protesters, or maybe she just wasn't feeling up to it that day. I don't know. But I think, yeah, we'll continue to see her. She tends to hand select the people that interview her, people that might not have interviewed her before. She certainly doesn't want to go on with some of the more the more aggressive journalists and some of the more prestigious journalists that are going to grill her and maybe catch her in a bad moment.
So you covered the Trump White House. I'm curious, what's your take on seeing how these two White Houses have functioned thus far?
Yeah, you obviously worked in that office, and you had your own, working in the media office where you're trying to prepare people for interviews and stuff, and it ended up, nobody can really get President Trump to follow a script or talking points, but
yeah.
At least he went out there and talked to the press. I think there's a lot of reporters that miss the president being freewheeling and being able to talk authentically about issues and answer their questions. It's just so bad right now for any reporter covering Joe Biden. He doesn't take questions. He doesn't hold press conferences, and he doesn't do many interviews. Likewise, when you go on a trip with Kamala, it's very restricted. They keep reporters away from her. She doesn't come up and talk to reporters unless it's off the record, in the backseat of the plane where nothing can embarrass her. So that's kind of where we're at this point, and it's certainly kind of disappointing for reporters, and hopefully it might change, but I don't think anyone's holding out any hopes.
Oh, well, talking about that, you were obviously in an election year. You have this criminal trial happening in New York City, a lot of stress on President Trump and the team. How do you think this criminal trial will play out in presidential politics?
Well, I think it's certainly, it is sort of a slow period right now between, it's April now, so it'll sort of take us through through the Memorial Day holiday. I think it definitely keeps Trump in the headlines, and, a lot of people will say it's better to be in the headlines than not. But at the other side, Trump could be spending more time talking about the issues right now, and I think he'd rather do that because Biden looks so weak on issues of the foreign policy, especially right now.
That's true. I do think he somehow indirectly, Trump is talking about the issues, which is that of lawfare, the basically political persecution based on this prosecution. And I got to tell you something, if I were in charge of his comms right now, I would show up to Barron Trump's graduation and go for it. Arrest me. Talk about like the reporters. They would go crazy at that moment if that were to happen. But what's your prediction?
Yeah.
And I love asking this, but like, what do you think is your prediction here for this election? How do you see it playing out?
Well, I tend to think that Biden can still pull this off. He's still managed to stop the bleeding among Democrats. There was a real problem there in the beginning of the year where even Democrats were terrified by the idea that somehow he was not old enough or fit enough to run for office. He's out on the campaign trail pretty regularly now, and he hasn't made any big falls, even on the short stairs. So, there's always that moment, that sort of Hillary-like moment where he could embarrass himself or stumble, make a really serious error, or even hurt himself. So. Right now, though, it seems like he's stopped the bleeding on the Democratic side, and he's going pretty strong. And so he could definitely win because he has more money and he has more organization than the Republican Party right now. And the Republican Party is working to catch up. But, after just looking at the election infrastructure that they have from last time and how they were able to pull off 2020, I really think that system kicks back into gear and gets him back in office.
Yeah, I do think for the Trump campaign, it's probably smart to go in as being the underdog and you have to outwork the other side. That's really going to be the way to do it. Charlie Spearing, thank you so much. Where can people get Amateur Hour?
Amateur Hour, it's found wherever books are sold, especially even on Amazon and certainly at Barnes & Noble and some of the other stores. So, yeah, keep an eye out for it, and we'll be around talking about it for the rest of the campaign season. It's an issue that will continue to be important until November. And heck, if Biden gets reelected, then we'll still be talking about it in months to come.
Well, I hope he doesn't get reelected. But thank you so much for joining me on CPAC Now.
You bet. Thanks, Mercedes.
And thank you all for watching. God bless.